Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We are very pleased to have you here. I'm Bill Milliken, sometimes known in Traverse City circles as Billy Milliken. We're very grateful we loved Helen. We didn't know until this day how many of you also appreciated her in that way. And I don't even know that we're all able to fit into this auditorium. A couple of the rooms adjacent may have some other guests that are with us today. We're happy that everybody is here. And after the program today in the sculpture court, we'll have a reception at which we hope everybody will be able to see each other and greet my father and say hello. We're honored today to have Governor Rick Snyder with us to share a few remarks. The governor's been a guest in our home. He's a new friend of ours, and we have watched him step into an office that the Millikens knew well, and have wished him well with that. Governor, we're happy to have you here. Would you come join us?
Thank you, Bill. Governor Bill, the Milliken family members, the Wallbank family members, and all of you, it's a special honor to be here today, because Helen was a special person. I didn't have the good fortune to know Helen as well as many of you did. I know many of you had close personal relationships, but I had a relationship that I viewed as special and do with the Milliken families, both Helen and Bill and Bill. The first time I had an interface with the Milliken family, they weren't even there. They touched my life back in 1974. I had just gotten a driver's license, I was in high school, and I went to work on my first political campaign. And it was to help a governor get reelected. That was the start of my relationship with the Milliken family. But in terms of personal relationships, I'm proud to say over the last few years, it's been a great opportunity to get to know Bill and Helen personally. And Helen was truly a special person when you had a chance to sit and talk with her. Two occasions I remember vividly. One was back in 2011. It was at the Michigan Legacy Art Park, a love of Helen's, the art park in particular. And it was an opportunity to give Bill and Helen an award for the Legacy Award. But I also remember a wonderful time sitting out on their patio, having lemonade, and enjoying the Grand Traverse Bay view. But what I thought I would talk about, because there's other people here that had closer personal relationships, was Helen's broader legacy, the difference she made in Michigan and the world. And you could talk about many fields, but I thought I would really focus on three in particular to show you the impact that Helen really had. The first one would be in the field of arts and culture. She loved the arts, and she made a difference. She was with the founder of Art Training, something that's been a continuing legacy in our state and really making a difference. And if you think about it, as we've gone through difficult years, we actually were able to do less in the arts. We, in some ways, went backwards in the arts. But Helen's legacy has continued on. Again, the Legacy Art Park is just a fabulous place. I'm proud to say, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to more than quadruple the investment the state is making in the arts again because of her leadership and her direction. We have wonderful things going on like Art Prize now that really point out that economic growth and the arts and culture are partners, not competitors. Then if you look at another field, equal rights, civil rights. I know she was passionate about that. She's quite famous for a number of her remarks in that area and the positions she took. In a well-deserved fashion. She earned it. She set the direction for many of us. That's something that we're continuing though, to understand we need to continue to work for better civil rights for everyone. A couple areas I'd mention in particular where Helen's legacy continues is with our migrant workers. We're doing things to improve their lives, both in terms of housing and education, an area that had been neglected in too many ways over the last decade, that we were able to make progress on a bill that languished for almost 10 years, was on bullying, because no one should be bullied, particularly if they're a student in our schools. Another love of Helen's was clearly the environment. She and Bill had that love together for the environment in terms of all the great work, Clean water, the Great Lakes, those were the days of alewives coming up on the beach where front-end loaders were coming to pick them up. Of Lake Erie, potentially dying. Of having bottles and cans all along our roadsides. Because of their efforts, we were able to clean those things up. I just did an event this last weekend for the Council of Great Lakes Governors. We met on Mackinac Island. And one of the main themes, why it was such a special meeting in many ways, is it was in 1982 on Mackinac Island that governors gathered that became the forerunner, that was the birthplace of the Council of Great Lakes Governors to focus on the Great Lakes. It was also the place in that meeting that became the creator of the Great Lakes Protection Fund. Things that's ongoing legacy today, doing wonderful things for our state. In many ways, we had to keep working the Great Lakes, but again, that was another area where I would say over a tough decade we went backward. The last time the Council of Great Lakes Governors met was 2005. So it had been 8 years since the principals got together to talk about such an important topic. Because as we know, we put the Great Lakes near the very top of what we admire and what we know we need to take care of. So it was with great pride that we started again, right at Mackinac Island again in 2013. The positive thing I will tell you is we got 8 resolutions to move forward on new initiatives, continuing initiatives. But one of the exciting things that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I can tell you personally, is every single attendee, every single principal there was excited to make a commitment that we would meet on a regular basis now. And it wouldn't be another 8 years before we continue to focus in on the Great Lakes. Those are tremendously important things. Why did I go through them? Well, I'm not here to give you kind of my view on old versus new political science on these issues. The reason I wanted to walk through those 3 issues is because I think it brings an important point about Helen's life. Almost every time that you go and hear a eulogy or memorial service, people will use the words, "This person touched my life," or "touched many people's lives." And that's an appropriate and very thoughtful word that should show up in almost every eulogy or memorial service. In this case, though, I'm standing here to tell you, by going through those 3 situations, that that word, in many ways, is an inadequate word. It's the right word to use because she really did touch our lives, both personally and professionally, and in our civic lives. But it needs a more powerful word. Helen did more than just touch our lives. She impacted our lives. She moved our lives forward in a positive way that is making a difference for all of us. That's more than simply touching our lives. And she's done it in a way that it wasn't about something she did historically in the past. The power of her ability to stand on principle, to communicate a message, to influence us, to impact us, is something that's going to continue on for many years to come. And that's something we can be both proud of and thankful for the great things she's done. So I'm here today on behalf of all Michiganders to say thank you, Helen. You have a special place in our heart, and you always will. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor and Mrs. Snyder. We appreciate your taking the time out of your schedules to be with us today. Your program today says that Senator Debbie Stabenow is next on the agenda. But crazy things happen in politics, and we have been thrown a curve by the affairs of the United States Senate in Washington. Senator Stabenow has been called upon by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to be on the floor of the Senate this afternoon, working to push her farm bill through. She chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee, and she warned us a couple of months ago that she couldn't see anything that would get in the way of her actually being with us today unless the farm bill moved. And the farm bill is on the floor, and she said that apparently they want to see that move ahead of the immigration bill, and that's the maelstrom of politics. So the senator did take the time to bring us a video message today, and on the screen we'll have her message playing for you. She told us that she wanted to be with us today and was sorry. I know that Brandon Fewens, her representative, is here today, and Brandon, thank you for coming to represent the senator.
Good afternoon. It's impossible to express just how much regret I have for not being able to be with all of you. Governor Bill, family, friends, Governor Snyder, everyone who is at this very, very special memorial. I have been so looking forward to coming, and I told Bill a couple of weeks ago there was only one thing that could get in the way of my being able to be there with you, and that was if the Farm Bill was on the floor in its final days for a vote, and unfortunately that's exactly what's happening. I was thinking today, though, that given the fact that we're increasing dollars for farmers markets and local food systems and the land conservancies and the Great Lakes, I think Helen's probably smiling today at all of the things that we're fighting to get done in this Farm Bill. Helen once said, politics is a little like climbing a mountain. You start out with high hopes and the challenge and the excitement of it, then the obstacles set in, and sometimes it gets very tough to breathe. What can I identify with that one? It's in times like this that Helen Milliken was a breath of fresh air, always. I was very proud to have her as a friend, a mentor, a woman who I have looked up to my entire adult life, who really has been a role model for what I would like to be and the way I would like to conduct myself as both a woman and as someone in public service. We all know that Helen's life reflected the time of change in women's roles in our society. And she often talked about when her daughter Elaine first challenged the views of women that Helen grew up with, that it lit a spark that would shine like a lighthouse for generations of women. And we are all still benefiting today from the light of Helen Milliken and all of the energy and the courage that have come from that lighthouse. In 1972, as we all know, Michigan became one of the first states to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. I was in college then, and I remember reading about this wonderful woman, Helen Milliken, who became one of the amendment's strongest supporters. And we all know how she crisscrossed the country lobbying legislatures to ratify it, became co-chair of ER America in 1979. As a young woman of 28 coming into the State House in 1979, I was grateful for Governor Milliken's willingness to treat me as if I was somebody, even though I was the new kid on the block and didn't chair a committee and really didn't have much power, and he was always so gracious to me, and I appreciated that. But what I really watched and appreciated as well was this wonderful First Lady, our longest serving First Lady, who was this woman of such amazing commitment and courage. We all know the story of when the Republican Party in 1980 opposed the ERA in its platform, and how she made her protest loud and public. She skipped out on the opening ceremonies of the convention held in Detroit, hosted by her husband, the governor. She instead protested the plank in the party's platform that opposed the ERA. I was amazed and in awe of this woman. And I'm sure it was an interesting time for the governor as well. But while she never missed a chance to speak up for her values, I know that he was a wonderful partner and supporter. And Governor Milliken, both of you are such role models for dignity and courage and standing up for your values and principles. When I think of Helen, I think of her as the original believer in pure Michigan as well. Long before it was popular, Helen made the link between clean air, clean water, and our economic growth. She knew that Michigan's great outdoors and our beloved Great Lakes were and are our greatest assets. Her leadership on women's rights, the arts, the environment, the list goes on, have made Michigan the wonderful place that we get to enjoy today. It's impossible to describe just how much I admire Helen Milliken in her life and how her encouragement of me starting from the mid-70s right on up to her passing and encouraging me, writing me notes, supporting me, encouraging me to keep going like she did so many women has been so meaningful to me. She once said, once the door gets open, it's never closed. How far we've come, but how far we have yet to go. She kept moving forward and encouraging all of us to have confidence in ourselves, to dream big dreams, to take the risk, to work hard, and to do everything we can to make the world around us a better place. We have a lot of work left to do in her memory to continue her wonderful legacy. She brought us this far. Let's keep going together for as long as it takes. God bless you.
We thank the Senator and Brendan. Thank you for making this happen today, at least in video form. Over a 40-year period, Helen Milliken and Joyce Braithwaite enjoyed the best friendship that two women could have. Joyce Braithwaite was a senior level member of the Milliken administration during Dad's 14 years in office. Managed one of his campaigns for re-election successfully. And she has some thoughts today that she wants to share with us. And I think you'll find them compelling. And they'll give you some insight into Helen Milliken that not all of us knew. Joyce, would you come share your thoughts with us?
I realize that most of the people in this room, or some of the people in this room, don't know Helen's history past the governorship. And so I thought I'd tell you a few things about Helen. Stepping into a public role which has never had a clear definition is a thorny chore. It's not the role of the governorship itself which eludes description, because those tasks for the governor are defined by Article 5 of the Constitution and by time and circumstance. It's the job of the so-called First Lady which can be vexing. Even the term First Lady has a rather silly ring to it in these times. Traditions and symbols are important, but perhaps the time has come to to alter the presumption that the public hires two people when it elects one of them. So vague is the role that little or no note was taken of some of the more than 40 governors' wives in Michigan history. No doubt they kept the home fires burning, acting as hostesses on official occasions, and perhaps they wondered what they were supposed to be doing and how they fit into their husbands' professional lives. Even before the burgeoning feminism of the last century, governors' wives must have dreamed of doing more than acting as backup or an appendage to someone else's career. Surely they must have mused at the fairness of it all as the political pros catered to and smoothed the path of their husbands, while the women were left pretty much to find their own way through the maze. If one hears a new First Lady enthuse about how thrilling it's all going to be for her, it's safe to presume that she hasn't yet discovered the awful truth. No matter how hard she tries to find a niche for herself in the wheels of government, those wheels will turn without her and around her and maybe even over her. These choices are the same of those of any modern wife, except the governor's wife has to make them in the full glare of publicity, which distorts, magnifies, and dramatizes. The truth is that we all hope our lives will make a difference, and Helen Milliken's certainly did, in so many ways. She opened hearts, changed minds, adjusted to changing circumstances herself. Lest anyone thinks we're talking about Mother Teresa here, Helen was the first to note her faults and failures. But I believe she came closer to being perfection of anyone I've personally known. First, a bit of history about her life before the governorship. She had so loved her early life in Traverse City. Her husband was running the Milliken store in Traverse City, and she was the charming young housewife. Became mother to daughter Elaine and son Bill Jr. She enjoyed great friendships with Betty Parsons and Lou Ann Taylor and so many others here. She thought she was settled in a life. Then her husband decided to run for the Michigan State Senate, and he won. Still, this had little effect on her life. She remained in Traverse City, and he commuted between the two cities of Traverse City and Lansing. Later, her husband ran for the lieutenant governor with Governor Romney. Helen made the part-time move to East Lansing and enrolled in the landscape architecture program at Michigan State University. She loved this chapter of her life. Her husband was at the Capitol, and she had classes, so she enjoyed it all so much. She loved the small apartment in East Lansing. But now fate took another hook in her life. Governor Romney quit the governorship to accept a position with President Nixon in Washington, and Milliken stepped into the governorship. And life swept up a step for Helen. She was suddenly preoccupied in their move to the governor's residence in Lansing from the home they loved here, thrust into the hullabaloo with a total transfer of a life she knew for a life she didn't know. I had been hired by Governor Milliken to come to work for him when he was lieutenant governor, but my life stepped up too when I left my work as an aide to the Republican state chairman and reported to the governor's office instead of the lieutenant governor's office. So there we all were, starting out together on new paths. Helen was one of the most wonderful, generous, caring, and most dedicated to doing good of anyone I ever knew. She saw good everywhere and practiced such remarkable kindness always. She was soft-spoken, intellectually superior, turned out to be the best role model ever, but there was so much more to her. I hope I may remind you today of things we all knew about her and perhaps add some things you didn't know. First, what a gardener she was. It seems her happier moments found her kneeling in a big sun hat over her plants and perfect blossoms. This is how I prefer to remember her. A beautiful person taking such joy in her perfect gardens. Her voice was like soft music. No matter how annoying things became, and no matter how disappointing people could be, no matter the crisis around her, she was never given to ranting or raving. Just her own sweet and dignified soft tones firmly expressed her closely held and her developing views. She once said, "At first I was trying desperately to find my proper niche in the swirl, to juggle the invitations to what seemed like every school, every club, every banquet in the state. It soon was obvious that I could never fully respond to every demand made of me. I knew I had to decide what areas were both meaningful to me and could also be translated to the public good. Examining the options at that time, the areas I chose were the arts, the environment, and the newly emerging women's movement. If I were to list them now, the same areas would be my choice, but in the reverse order." She also said, "Talking about an issue, striking a chord in others, and awakening them to all that they can be. This is what is important to me and will be all the days of my life." But those were her words after she'd grown more comfortable in public life, after she'd gotten the hang of it all. I remember, however, when she was still new to Lansing and politics, overwhelmed by supervising the move of their possessions, new to thousands of requests for her to speak to various groups, new to becoming fully engrossed in her husband's political life, a life she would never have chosen for herself. She called me one evening after moving to Lansing to tell me that she had an invitation from Tim Skubick to be a guest on his newly acquired television show at WKAR-TV in East Lansing. She hadn't yet tried to venture out on her own at that point. I urged her to accept. She asked if I'd go with her, and I agreed. The night of the show, she turned out to be a natural, articulate, composed, and very appealing. When we left the studio, she asked me rather shyly how I thought she had done. "You were fabulous," I responded. "I thought I was okay too," she said. I said, "You have just burst forth like a butterfly." After that night, whenever she left a phone message for me or sent me a note or a letter, she signed it Butterfly, accompanied by her hand-drawn picture of a beautiful butterfly. All these decades later, she still did that. Only now, recently, when her health was fading, I'd go to her house every couple of days and read aloud to her. These days were pleasurable for us both, and then she died. Most people in public life have speeches written for them to deliver, not Helen. She labored over her speeches. All words in every presentation were her own and came from her heart. It was remarkable the intimacy she brought to the crowds before whom she spoke. I had worked for Governor Milliken for 14 years as his executive assistant and campaign manager. But my friendship with Helen lasted more than 40 years, and it was a real friendship, life-sustaining and supportive, the kind we all wish to be blessed with. By very early on, our friendship had become a solid bond. I learned I could totally count on her care with confidence as I give her. She learned the same about me. In politics, there are no secrets, and no one can make a confidential or a private observation to anyone. It's a fact of life. But Helen and I built a wall around private things, and it was such a relief for both of us. Humor is easy to experience in those days, and I must confess that I don't see much that's funny in politics anymore. Once a group of us went out to dinner on a Saturday night. In addition to the Millikens and my husband, Jim Brickley, and I were George and Molly Weeks. We were having a fine time, but we were all startled when the governor suddenly leaped from his chair and was hopping around from a muscle spasm in his leg. He was a swirling mass. Helen said to the rest of us, "Pay no attention to him. He always does this when the bill comes." We all collapsed with laughter. Even the governor laughed, but he just kept swirling and hopping. I once remember when we were in the Dominican Republic and the governor's business regarding the republic's sister state relationship with Michigan. One day around lunchtime, the governor was sitting by the pool going over papers for a speech he was giving later that afternoon. Helen and I approached the pool, rather nicely dressed, our hair and makeup carefully done. We strolled by the governor and just kept walking along, right into the pool, where we strolled to the center bar in order to drink, sitting in water up to our necks. The governor witnessed this without a word from us. He was nonplussed. Fortunately, his good humor never failed him. So this story went into our histories with so many others. Another time we were in Hollywood in an effort to convince executives there that Michigan was a great place to film movies. Does that sound familiar, governors? We were invited to a party at comedian Danny Thomas's house. To the younger folks here, he was the father of actress Marlo Thomas and is the bride of Phil Donahue. Thomas's house was a spectacular place in the hills of Hollywood, with a deck surrounding the house and incredible views of the Pacific Ocean beyond. A group of us decided to go to dinner at Chasen's, the fabled Hollywood hotspot. Our crowd at dinner included Danny Thomas and his security guards, Governor Milliken and his security guards, Phyllis McGuire of the singing group McGuire Sisters and her security guards, and Governor Jerry Brown of California and his security guards. Helen and I got severe attacks of the giggles, could hardly speak, as we hoped no one in the restaurant dropped a dish by mistake or we'd be trapped in the resultant crossfire. Kind of a shootout at the OK Corral. And we whispered that perhaps having more female political leaders might put a stop to such foolishness, as women would be so less likely to pack heat. In 1975, President Gerald Ford came to Traverse City to be in the Cherry Festival Parade. In a car together with their heads popping out the top on this totally picturesque summer days were President Ford, our United States Senator Bob Griffin, and Governor Milliken. They drove through an excited and exhilarated crowd downtown, waving and smiling. We left Traverse City after the parade ended on our way to the next stop in Leelanau County, moving along swiftly until we came to a place on Long Lake Road where cows from the Gallagher Dairy Farm were slowly crossing the road right in our path, taking their own sweet time as the president, the senator, and the governor came to an unceremonious dead stop while the cows meandered across the road. After all, we were in their territory and they didn't care who we were. I look back on so many years with Helen and all the contributions she made in all of her state and national endeavors, the quiet way she always stepped aside when accolades were given, the supreme pleasure she always got from our escapades. We loved it when we were joined by our great good friend, Ellie Peterson, the first woman in the country to become a state chairman of a Republican Party. Once when the three of us were in the Upper Peninsula, Ellie, a fabulous speaker, gave the group assembled a 20-minute stem winder of a speech and sat down to thunderous applause. The applause awoke a very elderly woman in the front row wearing a slightly askew feathered hat. She leaped to her feet and shouted, "Tell us, Mrs. Peterson, what message do you bring to the ladies of Nobbinway?" Helen, Ellie, and I did not look at each other as we knew we'd burst into laughter. But this was another funny story we knew we'd be remembering for years to come. Helen had grown into such an effective leader who influenced and changed the world for all of us. Whether it was her tightly held views on pro-choice, her sponsorship of the art train and the pleasure it brought to so many who were able to see and appreciate fine art in their own communities, her staunch support of limiting oil drilling in the Pigeon River Country State Forest and lending I agree. And lending her name in daily efforts to support the banning of throwaway bottles and cans to preserve our state's beauty, and her commitment to clear billboards from that same landscape. In Traverse City, she was so committed to finding a place for the wives and children victims of domestic assault. Her important role caused the facility to be named Helen's House when at last the buildings became a Traverse City staple. The greatest effort was her work across the country for the Equal Rights Amendment. It was such a disappointment when it closely failed. Helen said simply, "Its time will come." Yet this marvelous woman was the same person who was at home fixing a Sunday evening dinner for guests when I called to tell her that my West Highland Terrier, Sam, had broken free from her leash and dashed off into the snowy, cold woods. I couldn't find her after an hour, and darkness was upon us. Helen was at my house in 5 minutes, so off we went in separate directions into the freezing, stormy woods. After about a half an hour, Helen was calling to me that she had Sam. We ran to each other, fell on our knees in the snow around Sam, kissing and hugging her. Sam was kissing us back. It was her dinner time, so she was glad to be found. This story only tells us that for dear Helen, no task was too large and no task was too small. But Helen really didn't want to be the only woman at the public table. She wanted all of us there. She wanted to be surrounded by sharp minds and wits. She went out of her way to be a mentor, to encourage young women in particular. And because of her, one of her gifts was the gift of constant invitation to everyone, of being the friend who always shows up, who never fails to come through. She was inexhaustibly an influence greater than even she knew. Poet Robert Frost said of death, "There may be little or much beyond the grave. but the strong are saying nothing until they see for themselves. I know what's out there. Helen is organizing all the angels right now. I will always remember an occasion Helen and I once shared in Arizona. After a busy day, we went out to our motel pool around midnight one night with millions of stars shining forth from that vast and indestructible sky. We wanted to sit in the pool and watch those stars from horizon to horizon, but the pool was closed and locked up for the night. Not about to give up on our plans, we helped boost each other over the fence, got into the pool, and gloried at the wondrous silence. Two friends, so amazed by that spectacular night sky, with the mountains seeming to move closer to us. I find the world so much less interesting without Helen. I look up at the sky so often now and remember her. I loved her.
I asked Joyce if she did encores, but she said we've heard her today. Thank you, Joyce. That was very touching. I learned some things there too. So that was the Helen that she knew. I knew one that told me to sit up straight, eat my broccoli, practice my cornet. An awfully good mother to grow up under. Helen was a Colorado native. Some of her Denver family is here, her sister Elaine. She used to tell me that when she was in high school in Colorado, in Denver, that she climbed Long's Peak. The state of Colorado has 52 14,000-foot peaks, and Helen climbed Long's Peak one day on an impulse, as I understand it, wearing her tennis shoes. Got up there to the top. It's a long day's climb and back. A snowstorm overtook them. It was pretty tough sledding getting out of there, but they made it back down, and it was. She was pretty proud of having done that. I later moved to Colorado, worked in Colorado, and I set out to climb a few 14,000-foot peaks. And Pikes Peak was near Colorado Springs, where I lived. Climbed Pikes Peak, enjoyed it. Related that to my mother. She listened patiently to my story and then said, "Have you climbed Long's Peak yet?" So I came back a little later. I climbed the Stone Needle, another 14,000-foot peak. Told her about that. She wanted to know if I climbed Long's Peak yet. And I must admit that I did several others, but I've never done Long's Peak, so that's in her honor. I was in Washington, D.C. Last month, and a Michigan friend, Jim Evans, described to me having sent his daughter to Mackinac Island as a Girl Scout for duty at the Mackinac Island State Park. And he said, we went back up to pick her up when her duty was concluded. He said, I couldn't believe how she had matured and grown in just the time that she was there at the barracks. He said, my wife and I both saw marked changes in her new maturity that we hadn't seen before. And one of the reasons that she had that experience was something that Helen Milliken did in 1973 when Girl Scout leadership in Michigan approached her and asked why the Boy Scouts had an exclusive lock on duty at Mackinac Island and at the state park. And in fact, the Boy Scouts started in June and worked all the way through the summer. Various troops from around the state rotated and came in and raised the flags and went to the governor's residence and shouldered a lot of responsibility there, but Girl Scouts, seemingly equal partners, didn't have a role there. And Helen Milliken went forward to the Mackinac Island State Park Commission and talked to the director of it and asked, and it was a bastion of white males at that point, I think it's fair to say. And she was told that women, girls, simply didn't have a place there because the facilities, the barracks weren't equipped for it. She said, well, isn't that just a matter of appropriating, making the necessary changes, bathrooms, making the facilities more universal? She pressed for that. I think she may have had some gubernatorial assistance. I don't know about that. But in fact, the next year, the Girl Scouts did have a role at the Mackinac Island State Park. And the Girl Scouts now share that duty 50-50 with the Boy Scouts. The Girl Scouts Heart of Michigan last year, their archivists did some research into what the effect of my mother's work to bring Girl Scouts into the fore at the island meant. And the archivist said that those actions by her affected the lives of 10,000 girls. And there may be some in this room that have a background in scouting, but we were asked last year to help write a copy for a plaque at the State Historical Museum in Lansing, talking about that act of getting the Girl Scouts involved. And so I worked beside my mother at her bedside and drafted it, asked her some questions, wrote it up. She read it, she smiled broadly, she nodded, she remembered it, she loved it, she was proud of it. And both the Girl Scouts Heart of Michigan, which is the Girl Scout organization in southern Michigan, covers 38 counties, and Girl Scouts Shore to Shore, I believe, is Traverse City's, northern Michigan's Girl Scout organization. Both of them cited Helen 2 months ago with a Trailblazer Award for the work that she'd done in opening up these opportunities for Girl Scouts in Michigan. And I know that she would have been very proud to have been there to have accepted that kind of reward. That was the kind of thing that she was proud of having been a part of. So, I want to, before we close today, to tell you that the photographs that we have seen, we are very grateful to the Traverse City Record Eagle, to the Detroit Free Press, and to the Associated Press, which agreed to go into their archives and share with us pictures of Helen Milliken. We were given about 125 photos to select from, and you've seen 29 of them today on this loop that's been on the screen, and it'll resume here in a minute. But we're grateful for their support. We're grateful for Gene Gentleman here at the Dennis Museum, who pushed off today a scheduled National Geographic exhibit, which is now going to come in tomorrow, the Birds of Paradise exhibition. Tonight, after we leave this building, all the galleries are going to be stripped out, and they'll be getting ready for 3 tractor trailers from the National Geographic Society tomorrow. So thank you, Gene Gentleman. We appreciate that. We have a reception that we'd like to invite you to next door in the Sculpture Court. You'll be able to see these galleries, which are still intact. And thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing each of you there. Thank you.